Guns are not evil. People do harm to people. People kill people. And that's what this gun gripe is inspired about today, is that people kill people, not guns. And the idea that these people want to legislate or ban inanimate objects, claiming that an inanimate object causes evil, I mean, that's just completely asinine as an argument.
Recent studies have sought to answer these questions about guns and people and navigate the gun debate impasse by focusing on gun ownership attitudes.
Let me show you my bedroom here. We got about 8 machine guns in here. We got sawed-off shotguns. We got M16s. We got handguns all around the whole area. Come home after work. I put the jukebox on. I talk to the girls. We have a cup of coffee. I start the fire, if it gets cold. I play with my guns. I watch TV, and I go to bed.
What psychological factors drive a person to choose sides and refuse to budge? If the goal is to modify gun ownership, first we have to understand the broader psychodynamics of guns.
This is a 12-gauge pistol grip shotgun, just like the kids used in the Columbine massacre over there. And they used one similar to this one, too. We sell real man's guns.
More than 30 years of public health research supports thinking of guns as statistically more of a personal hazard than a benefit. Guns in the home increase the risk of suicide. Guns in the home also increase the risk of a homicide committed not by strangers but by family members. The obvious question is, if having a gun increases the risk of gun-related violence and death, why do people choose to own guns? Traditionally, gun owners were thought to be simply ignorant of the facts. They were knowledge deficient about risk versus benefits and would change their minds as soon as they became aware of the evidence. But repeated warnings over the past 2 decades about the hazards of owning a gun has only resulted in owners increasing the number of guns they own and decreasing their support for legislation reform. Obviously, the knowledge deficit model is inadequate to explain gun ownership. We also know more now about human decision-making. 50 years of psychological research has shown that people don't typically weigh the risks and benefits of their behavior and then make a rational choice. And therefore, educational campaigns bombarding the public with the negative consequences of owning guns just don't work. Gun owners on both sides of the debate ignore risk and make decisions based on cognitive biases and what's called motivated reasoning, the kind of reasoning that favors emotion over accuracy. The risk of suicide, for example, can be dismissed out of hand based on the rationale that it will never happen to me. And since the risk of homicide in the home is greater for women than men, men are especially likely to think of themselves as immune to the risk of gun ownership. Cognitive bias impacts all rational decisions, but risk assessment is especially prone to being hijacked by our emotions. Research shows that estimates of the likelihood that something bad will happen are especially hampered by emotion. Fear, for example, and this is relevant to people buying guns, can cause your mind to overestimate the risk of danger and therefore the need for protection. Gun ownership is rooted in fear. The most frequent reason for gun ownership, and more specifically handgun ownership, is self-protection. Certainly there are those whose need for protection is real. They live in high urban crime areas. They have been victimized before and are rightfully afraid. Their local police don't do much to protect them. Their perceived need for self-protection is legitimate and justified by real risk. But, interestingly, gun ownership is actually lower in urban settings with high rates of crime and violence. That is, in communities where risks are clearly greater. And most gun owners in America are white men living in rural, low-crime communities. which suggests a mismatch between subjective fear and objective reality. Studies also clearly show an underlying racial component to the fear factor fueling gun purchases. During the 1960s, conservatives were uncharacteristically in favor of gun control when armed resistance was promoted by Malcolm X and the Black Panther Party. Today, mainstream society and NRA disinformation fear-mongering campaigns reflexively code white men carrying weapons in public as patriots, while marking armed black men as threats or criminals. Guns help fulfill the identities of white men as protectors of their families, while characterizing imagined dangers with rhetoric suggesting specific fears about black criminals. These findings suggest that gun ownership among white men may be related to a collective identity as good guys protecting themselves against bad guys of color. Fears about victimization can result in motivated reasoning and an emotional bias that both discounts the risk and overestimates the benefit of gun ownership, thereby skewing a cost-benefit analysis much the way it does when one buys a lottery ticket. Among gun owners, there is widespread belief that having a gun makes one safer, supported by published claims that where there are more guns, there is less crime, and statistics and anecdotes about successful defensive gun use. As compelling and self-evident as these claims seem to be, the best scientific researchers have found the purported data, in the words of the Venerable Rand Corporation, inconclusive. And this lack of confirmed science not only hampers a rational assessment of whether guns make owners safer, it also paves the way for each side to nullify opposing arguments in favor of one's personal bias and unsubstantiated opinion. It is important to realize that the fears of gun owners are neither irrational nor unilateral. Fear of victimization is a prominent source of both pro-gun and anti-gun attitudes. Gun owners fear being defenseless in a world with too much gun control. Non-gun owners fear excessive gun violence in a world with too little gun control. From a psychological perspective, gun control proposals are inherently polarizing in that legislation designed to decrease the fears of non-gun owners actually increases the fear of those who view guns as symbols of personal safety, and vice versa. The result is the Great American Gun Debate, which has dragged on for over 4 decades without producing results satisfactory to either side. The gun debate in America is often framed as a standoff between two immutable positions with little potential to move ahead with meaningful legislative reform. Attempts to resolve this impasse have been thwarted by thinking about gun ownership attitudes as based on rational choice, instead of, as psychological research shows, emotional concern. First of all, we need to keep in mind that there is no conclusive hard scientific data definitively supporting either side of the gun debate. And even if there were, we live in a post-truth era where facts don't matter and where decision-making employs shortcuts designed to sidestep objective evidence in favor of emotional biases. This emotional manipulation of the data, the blanket term for which is called motivated reasoning, is especially attractive as an option when the data itself, as is the case with gun statistics, inconclusive to begin with. It is clear, therefore, that so-called consequentialist approaches to the debate, that is, bludgeoning the other side with disputed and even misleading data warning about the consequences of owning or not owning guns, are both ineffective and counterproductive. Studies show that such an approach actually entrenches opposing opinions and strengthens resolve rather than change attitudes. Nevertheless, both sides of the gun debate share common fears about personal safety and victimization. Unfortunately, these underlying fears are well known for their tendency to short-circuit the decision-making process in a way that encourages cherry-picking the data to rationalize preconceived conclusions. That is, motivated reasoning kicks into high gear when weighing risk versus benefits of owning a gun. Coming full circle to the riddle, do guns kill people or do people kill people? A psychologically informed perspective rejects the question as a false dichotomy that can be resolved by the statement, people kill people with guns. And a closer look at people rather than guns, at the psychodynamics of gun attitudes, suggests that for meaningful legislative change to occur, both sides must acknowledge common victimization and safety fears and explore ways to minimize those fears while maximizing personal and public safety.